So as always, our work is based in ensuring that we are working towards our shared goal. And that shared goal, as you see, is that New Orleans Public High School graduates will thrive economically as a result of being the most sought after talent for hiring and advancement in our region's high wage career pathways. And so at Youth Force NOLA, this is what drives our work. This is what Ramel and I start our meetings with thinking about, and this is how we close our meetings. And so just wanted to ground us in that as we get started. So today we will, after we get through our just introductions and going over the agenda, we're going to dig right into looking at the building block focus for this presentation, which is planning for success and giving you some practical application strategies. Then we will transition from that over to Ramel, who will be talking about student self-monitoring in a hybrid world. And then lastly, we'll close with a tech tip of the month, which is going to be feedback and recognition, or feedback and reflection with Flipgrid. And there's another tool as well that we were going to discuss. So that's kind of our agenda for the day. And so here is who we are, the Youth Force NOLA Learning Design Team. At Youth Force NOLA, the Learning Design Team works cross-collaboratively within the organization. And we are very fortunate, Ramel and I, to have Imani Miller, the Vice President of Programs for Youth Force NOLA, as our leader. I am Nathan Stockman, Director of Learning Design. I'm a lifelong educator, English teacher, baseball coach, instructional coach. I was an administrator and then a principal. And now I am happy to be working with Youth Force NOLA to be part of this team that's working towards improving the outcomes for students, public high school students all across New Orleans. I also have two beautiful daughters and a lovely wife. And so that's a little bit about me. And I'll pass it over to Ramel to tell us a little bit about himself.
Hi, I'm Ramel, as Nathan mentioned. I like long walks on the beach. No, in all seriousness, I was previously a physical science teacher here in New Orleans, so that's my content background. And while at Youth Force for the last 3 years, I've had a couple different roles, from internships to working with our teacher fellowship. And that's really where I'll be speaking from, because I've been privileged to work with teachers in NOLA public schools to incorporate more explicit skill building and soft skill building specifically into their core subject matter.
Excellent. All right. Thank you, Ramel. All right. So let's jump in. We are grounding our work in soft skill building blocks. And so as we get into this work, I want you to understand that we're going to set the stage a little bit before we dig in specifically to planning for success. So for those of you who are not familiar with our work in this area, there are 6 building blocks, each of which contain 5 to 7 power skills. Those are the soft skills, or the individual skills that we target. We like to refer to them as power skills because that is what they are, very powerful. So the 6 building blocks are personal mindset, planning for success, social awareness, communication, collaboration, and problem solving. And within these building blocks, you will find a total of 35 power skills, skills that were written and identified using non-biased language, and it is based heavily in a strengths or asset-based thinking. So we want to thank MHA Labs and Leslie Beller for the work in developing these soft skill building blocks and all the many stakeholders that helped in the research of this. And this is the framework that envelops this work. We couldn't have soft skill building blocks if we didn't have skill building. And so I want to name that even though these soft skill building blocks are immensely valuable, and we all must understand the development of these skills that are sometimes referred to as 21st century and power skills, it is dependent on us as youth leaders to implement skill building practices. So we need to recognize some foundations of these skill building efforts, because just naming them isn't going to allow it to happen. So the steps here are critical in establishing an environment and process that promotes skill development. And they are, as you see, revealing targeted skills, establishing evidence, focusing the activity on the skill, plus recognition, meaning-making connections, assessment through feedback, and engagement. And so if you are really clever, you might have seen that the acronym for these steps is REFRAME, which just so happens to be the basis of our Introduction to Soft Skills workshop. So we use that REFRAME methodology when talking about soft skill building practices. So with that established, let's jump into our building block focus, which is planning for success. So this slide here is just a screenshot of what the Planning for Success poster looks like that comes along with the MHA Labs toolkit. And as you can see, it's not that big. We'll get into it a little bit deeper in a minute, but there are 7 skills within this Planning for Success building block. So let's get to the first one. So the first Planning for Success power skill is that of setting and prioritizing a goal or goals that reflect a self-awareness of one's capabilities, interests, emotions, and or toolkit. And or needs. Sorry, I was reading the chat. I saw the word toolkit. And or needs. And so this power skill here is one that would be extremely important in youth development. And so as I mentioned at the top, we target the skill, we seek evidence, and then we provide activities that focus on that. So an example might be, now that we've identified this as a power skill, what's an activity we can do that will help drive this? So goal planning is a common thing among youth. So let's look at this example where we bring goal setting or goal planning, but we bring in the ideas of self-awareness as suggested in that first power skill. So by having the young person establish their likes, their dislikes, their strengths, opportunities, personal connections in line with their goals, we're also teaching them that it's not enough to just say, I want to be a lawyer or a doctor, or I want to play in the NBA or professional baseball. There's much more to it, and all of those things that make them who they are part of that process. So again, just moving back, we have the power skill. We want to build that power skill, so here's an activity that will help drive that point forward. The next power skill in the Planning for Success building block is breaking goals into actionable steps. Seems quite simple, and maybe it is, but in this case, we have to look at the fact that there are many existing activities that involve this concept, and making the connection between success in these tasks and the importance of breaking goals into actionable steps, it really could just be an effort in being intentional as a youth leader. So for example, think of these products that exist in our current core classes: the math multi-step equations, scientific method, the writing process, responding to document-based questions in social studies. All of these processes involve breaking your goals into actionable steps. And so when we drive this point home, we're building that skill. This is, again, just a simple example. The next Planning for Success power skill is that of accurately estimating the level of effort and establishing realistic timelines. So often through school, the timelines are set for us as learners, and we have no say in them. So as educators, you're establishing the timeline yourself. Well, if we're going to teach the connection between effort, timelines, and ownership, we have to provide opportunities. And so this really isn't as difficult as one might think, but it does take some forethought. So here's an idea, and it's kind of simple, and really it flows nicely with our current climate of learning in the COVID world. And that is just taking project-based learning and turning it into project management-based thinking. So turn the project-based learning into a project management plan. You can use shared tools that are very prevalent on Google Suite. You can use a Google Sheets template. You can take a Google Docs and use a table or create a to-do list, or even things like collaborative whiteboards like Jamboard or Mural could be used in this case. This screenshot that you see here is a basic project management template that I created that might help you in developing a project management style in your classroom or in a project with your young people. And so again, this tool helps the young person establish an understanding of how they can accurately estimate the level of effort and establishing realistic timelines. So those are the three. Those are some of the planning for success power skills. Here's another one: managing time to complete tasks on schedule. Again, in the school world, we often refer to this as just getting to class on time or turning in your assignments on time. However, the magic is understanding why this is not occurring. And so building the skill of those who can't and strengthening the skills of those who can is where we need to go with this. So some examples of activities that help in this power skill are encouraging weekly planners, setting aside time in class for planning, promoting reflection on those plans. Did they work? Did they not? Even providing or assigning an accountability partner. So this example that you see here screenshotted is just a phone, and the wallpaper on the phone is the young person's handwritten weekly planner. So every time they take out their phone now, they're also seeing what's ahead of them for the week. This might not be as cool as another kind of screenshot that or wallpaper a student might have, but it might help keep them on track. And so again, this basic activity here helps drive the point home of managing time to complete tasks on schedule. So there are three more power skills within the planning for success block, and those are applying existing and newly acquired knowledge, skills, and strategies that one determines to be useful for achieving goals. Monitoring the progress and your own performance and adjusting your approach as necessary. And and demonstrating a belief that one's own actions are associated with goal attainment. So I've left the examples off of Power Skills 5, 6, and 7. Ramel, once I pass the baton to him, is going to help us walk through how we can utilize those, but I just want to quickly name them again: the applying existing or newly acquired knowledge, skills, and strategies that one determines to be useful, monitoring your own progress and performance and adjusting as necessary, and demonstrating a belief that one's own actions are associated with goal attainment. All right, so here's our first opportunity to have you engage in the chat. So if you are standing near your keyboard and are able to participate, make sure your chat is addressing the panelists and the attendees. And we'd love for you to share what are some ways that you have your students or your young people plan for success. Are there any tips or strategies? Are there any tools or any ideas that you have? So we'll take 2 minutes here to let you drop something in the chat, and then we'll move forward with Ramel's self-monitoring in a hybrid world.
Is just in order to illustrate what this can look like in a hybrid environment, we're going to cover one impactful 10-minute story of a classroom where we did some soft skill focused work and development. We're going to start that off with a brief explanation of what the foundations of self-monitoring look like in a learning environment. So that could be in your program or it could be in a classroom, the actual story of that classroom. And then we'll pause for the last minute or two for submitted questions. I should also note that it did seem to be loading slowly, but hopefully we'll have some examples from a second classroom as well as we finish up. So let's proceed. So first and foremost, to understand self-monitoring and empowering our young people to do that, we have to understand it as a three-pronged approach. We can't really have empowered self-monitoring if we don't start with setting expectations. So we've got to be clear about those. They've got to be understood. And that's really the backbone of the work. And then we can get to the process and practice of self-monitoring, or the students can really. And we end cap that with self-reflection, because in order to improve over time and to monitor and see growth, we have to reflect on an experience. It's not so much just the experience, it's reflecting on it and taking action on that. So to zoom in for a second on these 3 steps, when we're setting expectations in a hybrid environment, please be mindful, all student-facing education practitioners, that we want to clear expectation, we want to clarify expectations for both the process and the outcome. Meaning we need students to understand, or young people to understand, what they should be doing and taking action on and what that should look like, but also what the end product should look like. What I want to try to move people to understand or believe is that good expectation setting doesn't look like laying down the law or something in a stern manner. What it looks like is empowering your students to own their own growth and learning. So by making expectations clear, students can work along the way and do exactly what we aim for: self-monitor. Some quick examples you can see over to the right. Video explanations can be very fun. They can even connect your students to the real working world. You can do a lot of work with example and non-example in terms of the outcome. So this is what your paper or paragraph should look like. This is what your essay should not look like. Lots of teachers use rubrics. And one of the really fun things that I've actually seen in recent years is using scenarios or role plays and then having students grade those rubrics, because it's a low lift, low stakes activity that can help students get more familiar with what the expectation is, or more hilariously, what the expectation isn't. And then lastly, we'll talk about some real-time cues that you can give students in your hybrid environment that may actually help them to remember the expectation if you've gone a few days without revisiting the specifics. So with student self-monitoring, that is really the actual action of the student measuring their performance or progress over time, or against a product, or to a product against a standard. So the idea here is really getting at that soft skill that Nathan mentioned earlier around monitors progress and own performance, adjusting approaches necessary, that back end being part of reflection. So what this can look like in the hybrid classroom, again, you can have rubrics. You can actually make those action-oriented rubrics where students are finding where they are on that rubric, or adjusting in real time. You can have checklists that help students understand, what do I do next? Tracker sheets that really get into monitoring, or some of the favorites I've seen were project timelines in project-based learning, which have been really great for student self-monitoring because they have access to all of the resources at once. And then they're actually tasked with breaking things down into smaller tasks to meet the larger chunks. And lastly, as we zoom into student reflection, that bookend for solid progress monitoring, we've got student processes, or the ability for students to process their experience. They've got to understand what they went through, the ups and downs of it, what they liked and disliked. And then maybe more importantly, they've got to look at the evidence. So we're not just going on how we feel or how things went in our head. We're actually using hard evidence to claim our successes or to point out where we can grow. So again, we're hitting on those soft skills that Nathan highlighted. And this can look pretty familiar. I think a lot of you all already do Google Form surveys, peer or educator feedback. One of the resources we're going to share today is what we call the Delta Plus method, where collaborating peers can talk about something that a peer may have really contributed that was great, or something they can change, hence Delta. And Nathan will actually cover a little bit of Flipgrid, but suffice to say, there are a lot of really engaging ways for young people to reflect, and it doesn't always need to be sort of a journal type opportunity, although that does work. So let's look at one classroom and one story today. We'll be talking about an educator here in New Orleans named Laura Dunn, obviously in her most professional classroom setting with an inflatable pizza. I was told that this is one of her favorite photos, so fine. For context, Ms. Dunn taught 9th grade ELA as well as reading and research. She has taught everywhere from Dolores T. Aaron to Sci-High, and I believe is currently at Rosenwald. And her classroom setup is heavily focused on stations. So this one is very appropriate because it was already in a hybrid computer model before we moved to a hybrid model in this COVID quarantine space. The soft skills she focused on was collaboration. Now, her content skills were a lot about collaborating, but specifically towards finding evidence in text and writing persuasively. So she wanted students to collaborate to complete the task of finding text evidence together so that they could get to the point where they were writing independently. So sort of backwards from how some people might think. They work together to work independently. And this worked out fantastically well. Let's dive into it. So first, Ms. Dunn was huge on setting expectations. She had rubrics for every single project. And then she had one consistent rubric for the soft skill. So, excuse me. So I was very impressed, and I think most teachers can take away writing rubrics is a skill that you have to develop. However, it has a lot of payoff. Students were able to really start zoning in on what they were doing well or what they were missing to move to the next level. Whether they start at level 1 per se or level 10, they can always identify the next step up. And that was very empowering over time when matched with strengths-based mindsets. Also, another great way that she was able to communicate to students the expectation is through exemplars. She wasn't a believer in non-examples, although I find those to be hilarious. She was a believer in exemplars. So she would show students, hey, this is something from last year that students have done. Or if it was a new project, hey, this is an example that I completed that I thought would be at the level of a great 9th grade student, of a great scholar in that work. So this is how she set expectations. Let's look a little bit about towards how she allowed students to self-monitor with these expectations in mind. This is one example, sort of bridging the gap between setting expectation and self-monitoring. This organizer you see below was in a digital format in Google Docs. And during your classes, essentially what Ms. Dunn would do is give them this to work with as like a side screen. And you'll notice that in the middle box, everything cues the student for what they should be doing. So in terms of prep work, first of all, it's saying you're expected to do the prep work and that it should be thorough. It should use evidence and focus on big ideas, or it mentioned big ideas. They have space for notes. And then when they get into discussion, there are cues about active listening, building on your teammates' ideas, and asking and answering questions and using specific names. Now, those things all correlate to the rubrics we just saw in setting expectations. So it's very exciting to see students start to actively use this. And then I think the one thing that really got students into it was getting them to be vulnerable enough to be honest about their overall contribution and rating themselves on that STAR system. So now students, every time they get into a group, if they're striving to do these things and they're cued to do these things and self-monitor as this is happening in real time. So now let's look at some of the other ways that students monitored themselves and their progress in Ms. Dunn's class. As I mentioned, students worked in stations already. So these were in-person rotating stations and in hybrid, sort of like Zoom groups. So they were always in small groups, sometimes varied groups based on what they were reading. This checklist document, again, was a Google Doc, and students had their own copy. And it always answered that question, what should I do next? Because she might give them a 30-minute window. Students were self-monitoring and tracking throughout that time. And you'll also notice this is masterful in that it includes options for student choice. So there are some high Lexile level things and there are some lower Lexile level readings as well. And so students can even say on a day, maybe they're a strong reader, but they're just not feeling it. This is a great opportunity for them to pick a different story, but still push through. So again, this relates to that soft skill and that building block of kind of understanding your own personal inventory, assessing how you're doing and then what you can do. So this was one example, again, checklist documents. Highly advocate this for student small groups to drive progress and without you having to be right on top of the group. Another option was derived from a kit model that she brought over from previous teaching experience. There's a program, I believe it's called Read Baby Read. And the idea is that we're helping young people, and in this case, originally like elementary level students, track their growth. But what we found is good structured teaching works for all ages. So she created this graphic organizer for students to track independent reading, and then, not to get too ahead of myself, but and then get into self-reflection on a short-term basis about what students grew on, what they accomplished today, and how they wanted to do better. So these were all edited materials that she did only have the first portion, the Read Baby Read, prior to the teacher fellowship. She added the growth aspect after that, and in sort of a soft skill superpower space, so students could always explore the great things that they were doing, or the I should say the great actions they were exhibiting. So again, we've had the checklist, we had the cues before that, and now we got to the graphic organizers for self-monitoring. Lastly, she backed that up with reflection. And I just took a quick screenshot here of one of the reflection Google Forms surveys that Ms. Dunn used in the very first unit. So this is before students are really off to the races. They're just getting to know each other. And it's just simply asking, did you reach your personal goals? What are you proud of? And where do you want to go from here? But the big takeaway here is you're getting students to reflect on their experience, because they're not just, as John Dewey said, they're not going to learn from experience. They're going to learn from reflecting on that experience. The backside of this that's really helpful in the back room for educators and student-facing practitioners, you now have a record of how students are growing, where they're struggling, and where they want and need support. And you're able to tailor your support pretty specifically, because week to week, month to month, unit to unit, whatever you use your reflections for in terms of interval, you can see what's happening with the student. So this is great for them. Even commenting back to them at times continues to motivate them to actually answer authentically. And you're able to understand where the support needs to come from. So this was just one story of a classroom. We'll be including two actually in your link to resources. The other, I don't think the resources were quite uploading, so I didn't want to stall things out. But this was one story of a classroom. We have multiple others, specifically a biology class we'll cover, where they were focusing on collaborating on experiments in their classes, and in the individual experiments they were doing in a hybrid model. So these are just some opportunities. I'm gonna stop share and throw it over to Nathan so that we can really close out with some great tech tips. But this is the way it can be done, and this can all happen in hybrid model in a very effective teaching environment.
Great. All right. Thank you, Ramel. That's outstanding. So to kind of take us home today, I want to go ahead and just share a couple of tech tips that we think could be helpful in driving these points forward.
You know, so, Nathan, I do apologize. I apologize. There was one more slide that was very important. If you could cover that, and then we could jump into tech tips. I don't think you can leave out student voice when we're talking about student self-monitoring.
Is this your slide?
Yeah. So when you share your slides, if we could just cover that really briefly. I'm so sorry, folks who are watching or even checking the recording, but this is very important. So your tech tips will come in just a moment. Nathan, do you have the screen share?
Yes.
So I don't want to hold up the technology from people. I know they're ready to learn about new apps.
Yeah, no, I'm sharing the screen with the student out with the outcome slide.
All right, great. Thank you so much. And so what's important here is that this is actually what students said. I'll give you a second to read, I suppose, but these are unprompted responses from students when asked, what did you take away from the year? So what you're seeing, and when I should say unprompted, I mean unprompted in terms of language. So what you're seeing is students recognize that they're working on collaboration, the working together is pushing their thinking, and that when they're getting together with each other, they have something to contribute and others have new ideas to contribute to them, and that there's value there. So I think any classroom teacher would be head over the heels if they saw ninth graders coming to a 10th, 11th, or 12th grade class in the next years who already believed in the value of others' input and the value of collaborating and reading and finding textual evidence. Thank you so much, Nathan. Sorry to slow the roll.
No problem at all. Okay, so thanks, Ramel. Yeah, you're right. We can't forget the young people. That's why we're here. So anyways, the last two things I want to share are directly related to technology tips on this self-reflection idea. So the first one is a tool called Padlet. I want to name that these are very easy tools. They integrate simple in a simple way with anything Google or Microsoft Teams related. And it does not take much to learn them. But essentially, Padlet is an online discussion platform, but you can organize the discussion in a number of different ways. You can have a tile view, you can have a scatter view, you can have a timeline view. What it is it allows you to set up a either public or private or small group or whole group or any combination of the four type of discussion. It is primarily text-based. I don't know if there's any other integrations with video, but this allows you an opportunity to engage in some self-reflection or some group feedback in an online platform style. The thing that I find about this method is it gives voice to the students who don't want to raise their hand, who don't want to clog a classroom discussion, who are afraid of the way their voice sounds because they're going through puberty, but they have a great message that they want to be heard. So this is a method for that. This is just a capture of how the way we used it this summer in a soft skills community of practice meeting. So that's one example. The next one is very similar. It's called Flipgrid, and it's similar in that I didn't have to change much of the description. It's question and answer based, it's discussion, it is public, private, small group, and whole group, but it is video based. So what happens with Flipgrid is your prompts can be either written, but the preferred method is for you to record a snippet of yourself prompting the students, and then the students respond via video. So you can set the length of the video, 30 seconds, 45 seconds, a minute. But basically the opportunity here is to have students provide voice to what they've been doing. I think this is a masterful way to provide differentiation on a self-reflection level. Maybe students don't have quite the mastery of the written English language, but they can articulate it to you through video. This is an opportunity for them to have voice. Maybe this is, you can see the many different opportunities here. So Flipgrid and Padlet, Google them. I don't have how-to videos because there's a million on YouTube that you can check, and they're probably done better than I could do them. So check those out. I highly recommend them. All right, the last thing to close, first of all, I want to thank you so much for your attendance today, or if you're watching this recorded. We are right at under our 45-minute mark, Ramel, so we're doing just fine there. If you're interested in learning more about the Soft Skills Educator Cooperative, so that is a group of teachers across the New Orleans public high schools that are working together to build soft skills tools, that are sharing tools. If you want to be a part of that group, you can contact Ramel through his email, which is ramel@youthforcenola.org. Or if you are a non-school-based person, so you're an after-school program or you're a weekend program and you're interested in being one of our soft skills practitioners, I'm your guy. All right, I am heading up the work of leading the non-school-based practitioners, and you can reach out to me, Nathan@youthforcenola.org. For all of you who are considering this work or who want to get your colleagues on board, or you want to take a refresher if it's been a while, our next Introduction to Soft Skills workshop will take place in January. It's normally a full to half day workshop that we have condensed into 3-hour and 15-minute sessions done over Zoom to accommodate this current landscape. And you can check that out by looking on Eventbrite and following Youth Force NOLA. You'll see access to the January registration as well as a March registration and any other Youth Force NOLA events that pop up. And then lastly, if you can please take some time to complete the survey. You can find that survey at bit.ly. It's a bit.ly link shortener. So bit.ly/YF-NOLA, Youth Force NOLA, and then the numbers 1118 that correspond to today's date. So bit.ly/YF-NOLA 1118. 4 quick questions for you to respond to, an opportunity to provide some comments, and then upon completion, a link to a website that we've been building out that hosts our tools. So you'll find the resources linked there, and just go back to it frequently because we update often. All right. I want to thank you all so much for attending. We wish that you have a safe holiday weekend coming up, or holiday week coming up, and we look forward to seeing you in the future. Thank you so much.